For 20 years, Beulah Estelle Monroe had been opening letters from a dead man. The brass key turned in the post office box with the same reluctant click it had made every Tuesday morning since 1863. Beulah's weathered fingers, once soft as peach silk, now bore the permanent stains of laundry soap and heartache. The familiar weight of an envelope rested against her palm. Cream-colored paper, that distinctive slanted script that had haunted her dreams for 2 decades. "Another one from your Virgil, Mrs. Monroe." Postmaster Tobias Hale's voice carried the gentle mockery reserved for mad women and spinsters. Behind wire spectacles, his eyes held the same mixture of pity and fascination that had followed Beulah through the dusty streets of Millbrook Crossing since the war's end. "Indeed, Mr. Hale." Beulah tucked the letter into her worn velvet reticule. "My husband remains prolific." The lies came easier now. 20 years of practice had honed them to perfection. She'd crafted an entire mythology around Virgil's correspondence. Tales of his work surveying territories out west, his battles with claim jumpers, his promises to return once the railroad reached Devil's Canyon. The townspeople had long since stopped questioning why a surveyor would write weekly letters but never visit, why his penmanship never changed, why he seemed immune to aging or accident. You can almost smell the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light as Beulah stepped from the post office onto Main Street. The familiar weight of curious stares pressed against her shoulders like a heavy shawl. Mrs. Caroline Ruth whispered to her companion behind gloved hands. Young Josephine Inez, barely married herself, watched with the wide-eyed fascination of youth observing a living ghost. Beulah had been 22 when the first letter arrived, 1 month after the War Department's official notification that Private Virgil Monroe had been killed at Antietam. The impossible envelope had appeared in her mailbox like a miracle wrapped in paper, bearing his signature and a Baltimore postmark. "My dearest Beulah," it had begun. "I write this from the field hospital, broken but breathing that she'd wept for joy." Then fury, then confusion as the weeks passed, and no husband appeared at her door. Only more letters. Always more letters. Now, at 42, she understood that miracles were often crueler than tragedies. The bell above Miller's General Store chimed as she entered, seeking the week's supplies. Behind the counter, Ambrose Dutton looked up from his ledger with the practiced smile of a man who'd learned to mask his judgment in politeness. "The usual, Mrs. Monroe, please, and perhaps some of those peppermint sticks, if you have them fresh." Virgil's letters often mentioned his craving for peppermint. She'd begun buying them years ago, leaving them untouched in a jar on her kitchen table, another prop in her elaborate performance. "Of course we do. Anything else?" Ambrose's fingers drummed against the counter. "You seem different today." "Good different." Beulah paused, flour sack halfway to her basket. "Different how?" "Lighter, somehow. Like you've been carrying something heavy and finally set it down." The observation struck her with unexpected force. She hadn't realized the change showed so plainly. This morning, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror above her washstand, she'd made a decision that had been building for months, maybe years. "Perhaps I have, Mr. Dutton." She placed coins on the counter with deliberate precision. "Perhaps I have." The walk home took her past the cemetery where Virgil's headstone stood among the other war dead. She'd placed it there herself in 1865. Tired of the questions, the pitying looks, the whispered speculations. Here lies Virgil Monroe, beloved husband, lost but not forgotten. The inscription had felt like a betrayal then. Now it seemed prophetic. Her cottage sat at the edge of town, where the main road dissolved into wheel ruts and wildflower meadows. The front porch sagged under the weight of 2 decades worth of storms, but the rose gardens still bloomed with stubborn persistence. Virgil had planted those roses during their brief courtship. "Red as your lips," he'd said, "and twice as sweet." The roses had outlived him by 20 years. Inside, the familiar ritual began. Tea brewing in the chipped blue pot. The letter opener, silver, engraved with their initials, gleaming in the lamplight. The careful separation of wax seal from paper. Then the unfolding, the reading, the slow absorption of words that defied every law of nature and reason. My dearest Beulah, the mountain air grows thin here, and I find myself thinking of home more often than usual. Of your laugh echoing through our kitchen. Of the way you hum while hanging wash on the line. Do you still sing to the roses? Do they still remember my voice? I've been having dreams, strange and vivid. In them, I'm standing in a great library, where all the books are filled with things I never said to you, words I should have spoken before the war took me away. I wake with the taste of unshed tears and the certainty that time is running short. There's something I must tell you, something I've hidden for too long. The truth about these letters, about what I've become, about the choice that lies before you. Look for me tomorrow at sunset by the old oak where we carved our names. I'll be there, or something like me will be. What you see may frighten you, but don't run. Please don't run. Forever yours. Virgil. Beulah's hands trembled as she set the letter down. In 20 years, Virgil had never requested a meeting, never promised to appear, never spoken of truth or choice. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows with unusual force. The roses bent and swayed as if bowing to some invisible presence. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the evening breeze, she could swear, she heard the sound of footsteps on the old road. But when she looked toward the oak tree, a figure stood waiting in the gathering dusk, impossibly tall, impossibly familiar, impossibly there. The teacup shattered against the kitchen floor, porcelain fragments scattering like fallen stars. Beulah's breath came in sharp gasps as she gripped the windowsill, her knuckles white against the weathered wood. The figure by the oak tree hadn't moved, tall and motionless as a monument, watching her cottage with the patience of the dead. 20 years of imagining this moment, and she'd never once considered the terror. Virgil. The name escaped her lips. As barely a whisper, lost in the evening air, the wind stilled. Even the roses stopped their restless dancing. In that pocket of absolute silence, the figure raised one hand, a gesture both greeting and benediction, achingly familiar, yet wrong somehow. As if performed by someone remembering how to be human. Beulah's legs moved without conscious thought, carrying her through the kitchen, past the parlor where Virgil's photograph smiled from the mantelpiece, out the front door where the evening air tasted of copper and coming storms. Her bare feet found the path she'd worn between house and oak. Over the years, walking it whenever grief demanded pilgrimage, the distance felt infinite. Each step brought details into sharper focus. The way he stood with his left shoulder slightly raised, a habit from favoring an old injury. The familiar tilt of his head when listening. The coat she'd mended a dozen times before he left for war, somehow unmarked by 20 years of wear. Beulah. His voice carried across the space between them, rich and warm and impossibly present. You came. She stopped 10 feet away, close enough to see his face in the dying light. The same strong jaw, the same dark eyes that had watched her hang laundry and tend roses and grow old without him. But something lurked behind those familiar features, a depth that spoke of places no living man should know. You're dead. The words came out flat, matter of fact. I buried you. Put flowers on your grave every Sunday for 20 years. I know. He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of him, not decay as she'd feared, but something else. Pine. Needles and old books and the metallic tang of distant thunder. I've watched you. Watch me. The accusation sparked anger she hadn't expected. You've been watching me grieve? Watching me make myself the town madwoman with your impossible letters. The letters were necessary. His voice carried no defensiveness, only a bone-deep weariness. To keep you tethered. To give you reason to hope. Hope for what? She laughed, sharp and bitter. For this? For my dead husband to appear like some fever dream. For choice. He extended his hand, palm up. The choice I never gave you before. The wind picked up again, sending leaves skittering across the ground between them. In the distance, Beulah could hear the faint sounds of evening life, dogs barking. Children called in for supper, the normal rhythms of a world that made sense. Here, in this circle of impossible reunion, nothing made sense at all. What choice? But even as she asked, part of her already knew. The letters had been preparing her, leading her toward this moment with the patience of a master craftsman. To follow me. His eyes never left hers. To step outside the narrow bounds of this life and see what lies beyond. You're asking me to die. I'm asking you to live. He stepped closer, and she didn't retreat. Really live, not just exist. You've been dying by inches for 20 years, Beulah. Performing life instead of living it. The truth of his words hit like a physical blow. She thought of the peppermint sticks growing stale in their jar, the roses she tended like a shrine, the careful lies she'd spun to explain his absence. What had she been protecting? What had she been preserving? I don't understand. Her voice broke on the words. How are you here? How have you been writing to me? Love creates its own laws. He touched her cheek, and his fingers were warm, solid, real. Death tried to part us, but love wouldn't let go. I've been caught between worlds, Beulah, neither fully gone nor able to return. The letters were my anchor, keeping me close enough to reach you when the time came. And now I'm free to choose. To cross over completely or, he paused, studying her face, to take you with me. The rational part of her mind screamed. Warnings. This was madness, delusion, the final break from reality she'd been approaching for years. But her heart knew better. Her heart recognized the truth that defied explanation, that love sometimes burned too bright to be extinguished by something as simple as death. Where would we go? Everywhere. His smile was the one she remembered from their wedding day. Nowhere. Places that exist in the spaces between heartbeats, in the pause between question and answer. We'd be free, Beulah. Free from time, from grief, from the weight of pretending to be something we're not. She thought of Millbrook Crossing, of the townspeople who watched her with mingled pity and fascination, of Tobias Hale's mocking sympathy, Caroline Ruth's whispered gossip, her own careful performance of widowhood. What would she be leaving behind? What would she be choosing? The roses, she said suddenly. Who would tend the roses? They'll remember us. He took her hand, and she felt the familiar calluses from his carpentry work, unchanged by 20 years of impossible existence. Love leaves marks on the world, Beulah. The roses know our story. Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The oak tree's branches whispered secrets in a language older than words. And somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of approaching footsteps, steady, purposeful, coming closer. Someone's coming, she whispered. Virgil's expression darkened. Luther Pritchard. He's been watching you, following you. He knows about the letters. Luther. She turned toward the sound, recognizing the heavy tread of the town's self-appointed moral guardian. Why would he? Because he's been reading them. Virgil's voice carried a note of steel she'd never heard before. Intercepting them before. They reach you. He knows what I am, what I'm offering, and he means to stop it. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied now by the jingle of spurs and the deliberate click of a rifle being cocked. Luther Pritchard emerged from the shadows between the trees, his weathered face set in grim determination. Step away from him, Beulah. Luther's voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. That thing ain't your husband. It's an abomination, and I aim to put it back where it belongs. But as Luther raised his rifle, Virgil smiled. And for the first time in 20 years, Beulah saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. The smile that crossed Virgil's face wasn't the gentle expression Beulah remembered from their brief marriage. This was something hungrier, ancient, touched with the patience of a predator who'd waited decades for the perfect moment to strike. Luther Pritchard. Virgil's voice carried new harmonics, deeper notes that seemed to resonate from somewhere beyond his throat. Still playing sheriff in a town that never wanted you? Luther's rifle trembled slightly, but his voice remained steady. I know what you are, demon. Been tracking your kind since the war. You ain't taking her. My kind. Virgil laughed, and the sound made the oak tree's leaves rustle without wind. You have no idea what I am, old man. What I've become. Beulah stepped back, her hand instinctively moving to her throat. The familiar voice, the beloved face. But something else looked out through Virgil's eyes now, something that made her skin crawl with recognition she couldn't name. The letters, she whispered. They weren't from you. Not really. Oh, but they were. He turned to her, and his expression softened back into something almost human. Every word, every memory, every promise, all mine. Death changes us, Beulah. It strips away the pretty lies we tell ourselves about who we are. Luther took a step closer, rifle raised. Don't listen to him, Beulah. I've been watching, reading those cursed letters. They're not love. They're hooks, dragging you toward damnation. You've been stealing my mail. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. For how long? 5 years. Luther's weathered face showed no shame. Ever since I found one that fell from your reticule. The handwriting was wrong. Too perfect, like it never aged. And the paper? He shook his head. Paper don't stay that. White for 20 years, Beulah. Not natural paper. She thought of the cream-colored envelopes, always pristine despite their supposed journey from distant territories. The ink that never faded, the wax seals that never cracked. Signs she'd ignored, because she'd wanted so desperately to believe. You had no right, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I had every right. Luther's eyes never left Virgil. This town's seen enough evil, lost enough good people to things that shouldn't exist. I won't let it take you too. Take me. Beulah looked between the two men, one alive and furious, one dead and patient. What aren't you telling me? Virgil's smile returned, but this time it carried genuine warmth. Luther's afraid because he knows what I'm offering you, what we could become together. Which is what exactly? Her voice sharpened. Stop speaking in riddles, Virgil. If you love me, tell me the truth. The truth. He stepped closer, and she caught that strange scent again. Pine and thunder, and something underneath, something that reminded her of the cellar after heavy rains. The truth is that I died at Antietam. Died ugly, alone, calling your name. But love, real love, doesn't end with breathing. The wind picked up, sending leaves swirling around them in patterns that hurt to follow. In the distance, storm clouds gathered with unnatural speed, blotting out the stars one by one. I clawed my way back, Virgil continued, his voice growing stronger. Not to the world of the living. That door was barred to me. But to the spaces between. The places where love and longing create their own geography. And the letters? My attempts to reach you. To prepare you. He extended his hand again, palm up. I've been building a bridge, Beulah. Between your world and mine. The letters were the foundation stones. Luther spat into the dust. Pretty words. For soul stealing. Is it stealing if it's freely given? Virgil's eyes flashed. I'm offering her eternity, Luther. Love that transcends death, unmarked by time or decay. What are you offering? 20 more years of loneliness. 30? Until she dies forgotten and alone. The words hit their mark. Beulah felt the weight of her solitary existence. The empty cottage, the pitying stares, the careful lies that had become her only companions. What was she protecting by staying? What was she preserving? Show me, she said suddenly. Show me what you really are. Both men turned to her, but it was Virgil who answered. Are you certain? Once you see, you can't unsee. I've been living with half-truths for 20 years. She squared her shoulders. I'll take the whole truth, whatever it costs. Virgil nodded slowly. Then, like a man removing a coat, he let his human appearance fall away. What stood before her wasn't a monster. It was something far more disturbing, a being of pure longing given form, shaped by 20 years of desperate love into something that resembled her husband but wasn't quite right. His edges seemed to shift and blur, as if he existed slightly outside normal space. His eyes held depths that spoke of places where time moved differently, where the rules of existence bent to accommodate impossible things. I'm what remains when love refuses to die, he said, and his voice now carried echoes of every word he'd ever spoken to her. I'm the answer to every prayer you whispered in the dark, every tear you shed over my grave. Beulah stared and felt no fear, only a deep, aching recognition. You're beautiful. Luther's rifle cracked like thunder. The bullet passed through Virgil without effect, embedding itself in the oak tree behind him. Virgil didn't even flinch. Iron and lead have no power here, he said mildly. This is a place of choosing, not violence. Then choose. Luther's voice cracked with desperation. Choose to leave her be. She's got a life here. People who care about her. Do they? Virgil's question hung in the air like a challenge. Tell me, Luther, when did you last speak to Beulah before you appointed yourself her guardian? When did any of you see her as more than an object of pity? The silence stretched long enough to answer. Beulah felt the truth of it settle in her bones. For 20 years, she'd been Millbrook Crossing's favorite tragedy, the mad widow who got letters from her dead husband. Not a person, but a story they told themselves about faithful love and romantic devotion. I see her, Luther said finally. I see her worth. You see her usefulness, Virgil countered. As a project, a good deed, a soul to save. But do you see her dreams? Her desires? The woman she was before grief made her small. Thunder rolled overhead, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Each drop that touched Virgil's form seemed to make him more solid, more present. The storm was feeding him, Beulah realized. Or perhaps he was calling it. The bridge is almost complete, Virgil said, extending his hand one final time. The choice is yours, my love. Cross with me and leave this world of small dreams behind. Or stay and spend your remaining years wondering what might have been. Lightning split the sky, illuminating three figures frozen in a moment that would reshape everything. In the distance, Beulah could hear voices calling, townspeople drawn by the gunshot and the sudden storm. They would arrive soon, bringing their questions and their judgments and their small-minded certainties. She looked at Luther, whose weathered face showed genuine care beneath the fear. She looked at Virgil, whose impossible existence promised wonders beyond imagining. And she looked at her own hands, scarred by 20 years of careful living, marked by the weight of choices she'd never allowed herself to make. But as she raised her hand to touch Virgil's outstretched fingers, the voices grew closer, and among them, she heard a name that made her blood freeze. Etta Geneva's been found dead by the river, and there's strange marks on her body. The color drained from Virgil's face, or what passed for color in his shifted form. For the first time since his appearance, he looked genuinely shaken, his carefully maintained composure cracking like ice under sudden weight. Etta Geneva, he whispered, and the name carried a weight of guilt that made the air itself feel heavy. She wasn't supposed to. I didn't mean for her to. What did you do? Beulah's voice cut through the rising storm with surgical precision. The approaching voices grew louder, boots splashing through puddles, lanterns bobbing like fallen stars in the darkness. I needed anchors, Virgil said, his form flickering between human and something else. Connections to this world. The letters alone weren't enough. I needed other sources of longing. Luther's laugh was bitter as gunpowder. Other women. You've been feeding off other women's grief. Not feeding. Virgil's denial came too quick, too desperate. Borrowing. Using their pain as stepping stones. Etta Geneva lost her sweetheart at Shiloh. She still visited his grave every day, still talked to him. I thought I could use that connection without harming her. But you did harm her. Beulah's words fell like stones into still water. You killed her. I touched her dreams, he admitted, and his voice cracked with something that might have been remorse. Entered her grief, used it as a pathway. But human minds aren't meant to carry what I've become. The bridge between worlds, it burns as it builds. The truth hit Beulah like a physical blow. She thought of the other war widows in Millbrook Crossing, the women who'd suffered strange illnesses over the years. Mrs. Caroline Ruth's sudden madness 3 winters ago. Josephine Inez's sister, who'd wandered into the woods during a blizzard, found frozen with a smile on her face and someone else's name on her lips. How many, she asked. How many women have you killed building your bridge to me? 7. Luther answered before Virgil could speak. 7 women over 20 years. All widows, all mourning men who died in the war. I've been tracking it, documenting it. Each death brought him closer to solid form. 7 souls, Beulah breathed. You murdered 7 women to reach me. I loved you. Virgil's form solidified with the force of his emotion, becoming almost human again. Everything I did was for love. They were already dying of grief, of loneliness, of broken hearts. I just used what was already there. You used them up. The horror of it settled over her like a shroud. You consumed their pain and left them empty. The approaching voices resolved into familiar shapes. Tobias Hale carrying a lantern, Ambrose Dutton with his shotgun, half a dozen other townspeople drawn by the commotion. They stumbled to a halt when they saw the tableau under the oak tree, their faces painting confusion and fear in equal measure. Luther, Tobias called out. What's happening here? We found Etta Geneva by the river, and she's... He stopped, his eyes widening as he took in Virgil's impossible presence. Lord have mercy. Is that Virgil Monroe? Ambrose finished, his voice barely above a whisper. But that's impossible. He's been dead 20 years. Not dead, Virgil said, and his voice carried to every ear despite the storm. Never dead. Just changed. The townspeople clustered together, their lanterns creating a circle of wavering light. Beulah saw the fear in their faces, but also something else, a terrible fascination, as if they were witnessing something out of legend. He's been killing our women, Luther announced, his rifle still trained on Virgil despite its obvious uselessness. Using their grief to anchor himself to this world. Etta Geneva was just the latest. That's not true. Virgil's form flickered again, anger and desperation warring across his features. I never meant to harm them. I was trying to reach Beulah, to build a bridge between worlds so we could be together. And 7 women died for your selfish love, Beulah said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. 7 women who trusted you with their pain. They were already in pain. Virgil pleaded. I just made use of it. They were dying anyway, dying of broken hearts, of loneliness, of lives with no purpose. I gave their suffering meaning. You gave it nothing. Beulah's voice was quiet now, but it carried the weight of absolute judgment. You took their pain and made it yours. You stole their grief and used it as fuel for your own desires. Lightning split the sky again, illuminating the growing crowd. More townspeople arrived, drawn by the storm, by the commotion, by the impossible sight of Virgil Monroe standing beneath the oak tree where he'd once carved his initials with a living woman's name. What do we do? Tobias asked, his voice shaking. How do we stop something that's already dead? You don't, Virgil said, and his form began to solidify again, drawing power from the storm and the gathered emotions. I've waited 20 years for this moment. I've sacrificed everything to build a bridge to the woman I love. Nothing will stop me from claiming what's mine. I'm not yours. Beulah's voice cut through the thunder like a blade. I was never yours. I was a woman who loved a man named Virgil Monroe, but he died at Antietam. You're just a hunger that learned to wear his face. The words hit him like physical blows. His form wavered, became less solid, as if her rejection was draining his very essence. No, he whispered. No, I am him. I am Virgil. I remember everything. Our first kiss, our wedding night, the way you hummed while hanging laundry. I remember the roses, the way you tasted like honey and hope. You remember because you stole those memories from me. Beulah stepped back, putting distance between them. Every time you touched my dreams, every time you entered my grief, you took pieces of what we had and made them yours. You're not my husband. You're a parasite wearing his skin. The crowd gasped as Virgil's form began to unravel at the edges. But instead of weakening, he seemed to draw strength from their fear, their shock, their overwhelming presence. His eyes blazed with an inhuman light. If I can't have you willingly, he said, his voice echoing with the power of the storm, then I'll take you anyway. I'll take all of you. This entire town will feed the bridge between worlds. The wind howled, and the oak tree's branches began to bend and twist, forming shapes that hurt to look at directly. The air itself seemed to thicken, becoming hard to breathe. Several of the townspeople cried out as they felt something invisible, clawing at their minds, seeking entrance to their deepest fears and desires. He's trying to anchor himself to all of us, Luther shouted over the storm. Using our emotions as fuel. Everyone needs to get back to town now. But it was too late. The bridge was already forming, invisible threads of hunger and longing stretching out from Virgil's form to touch each person present. Beulah felt it brush against her mind, cold, invasive, searching for the grief and pain that had sustained her for 20 years. Fight it, she called out, but her voice was lost in the wind. Around her, the townspeople were beginning to sway, their eyes growing distant as something inhuman rifled through their memories and emotions. And in that moment of crisis, as the supernatural storm threatened to consume them all, Beulah realized there was only one way to stop the monster wearing her husband's face. She would have to give him exactly what he wanted. Virgil, Beulah called out, her voice cutting through the supernatural storm like a bell through fog. You want me? Then take me. But leave them alone. The invisible assault on the townspeople's minds faltered as Virgil's attention snapped to her. His form solidified again, hope and hunger warring across his features. Beulah, no. Luther struggled against the psychic pressure weighing down his thoughts. You don't know what you're offering. I know exactly what I'm offering. She stepped forward, extending her hand toward the creature that wore her husband's face. Come, my love, claim your bride. Virgil's inhuman smile returned, radiant with triumph. I knew you'd understand. I knew you'd choose love over fear. He reached for her hand, his fingers crackling with otherworldly energy. The moment their skin touched, Beulah felt the full force of what he'd become. 20 years of accumulated hunger, 7 stolen lives. The weight of grief transformed into something monstrous and grasping. It poured into her like ice water, seeking to hollow her out and make her into another anchor for his existence. But she didn't resist. Instead, she opened herself completely, letting him see everything: her loneliness, her pain, the careful lies she'd built to survive, and beneath it all, the truth she'd hidden even from herself. "I stopped loving you years ago," she whispered, her words for him alone. "The Virgil I married was kind, gentle, would never have hurt an innocent soul. I've been mourning a ghost, and you're not even that. You're just appetite wearing his memory." Virgil's expression shifted from triumph to confusion to something approaching horror. "No, no, you love me. You've waited 20 years. I waited for a dead man because it was easier than learning to live again." Beulah's grip on his hand tightened, and she felt his strength beginning to flow into her rather than the reverse. "But you've shown me what that kind of love becomes when it refuses to let go. Selfish, destructive, evil." The storm around them began to shift, its focus changing. Instead of drawing power from the townspeople's emotions, it was now centered entirely on the connection between Beulah and Virgil. She could feel his essence unraveling, the stolen grief that had sustained him flowing back to its sources. "You can't," he gasped, his form beginning to blur and fade. "I built this bridge for us. I sacrificed everything. You sacrificed others," she corrected. 7 women who deserve better than to be consumed by your hunger. But their pain is returning to them now. All of it. Around them, the air shimmered as 20 years of stolen grief found its way home. The weight lifted from the townspeople's minds as memories and emotions that had been siphoned away came flooding back. Some wept, some gasped, some simply stood in stunned silence as they felt themselves becoming whole again. Virgil tried to pull away, but Beulah held fast. She was the anchor now, the bridge, and she was using that connection to drain him of everything he'd stolen. "I loved you," he pleaded, his voice growing fainter. "Everything I did was for love." "No," she said with absolute certainty. "Everything you did was for yourself. Love doesn't devour. Love doesn't steal. Love doesn't murder innocence to satisfy its own desires." She looked into his fading eyes and saw, for just a moment, a flicker of the man she'd actually married. The real Virgil would be ashamed of what you became in his name. The entity wearing her husband's face crumbled like paper in fire. But as it died, it tried one last time to drag her with it, to make her into the final anchor for its existence. Beulah felt the pull, the terrible hunger trying to hollow her out from within. For a moment, the temptation was overwhelming, to let herself be consumed, to finally escape the weight of 20 years' worth of careful living. It would be so easy to just let go. "Mrs. Monroe." Tobias Hale's voice cut through her despair. "Don't you dare leave us. This town needs you. We all need you." Caroline Ruth added, her usual gossip replaced by genuine concern. "You're part of us, part of our story. Fight it." Luther commanded, his rifle forgotten as he stepped forward. "You're stronger than whatever this thing made you think you were." Their voices, the voices of people who'd known her not as a tragic figure, but as a neighbor, a friend, a woman worth saving, gave her the strength to resist. She was more than her grief, more than her careful performance of widowhood. She was Beulah Estelle Monroe, and she chose to live. With a sound like wind through dry leaves, the last remnants of the thing that had called itself Virgil dissolved into nothing. The supernatural storm broke, leaving only natural rain falling on natural ground. Beulah collapsed to her knees, but gentle hands caught her. Luther on one side, Tobias on the other, the whole community gathering around her with the kind of care she'd forgotten existed. "Is it over?" Ambrose asked, his voice shaky. "It's over," she confirmed, looking up at the oak tree. The twisted shapes in its branches had returned to normal, and carved in the bark, she could see the initials that she and the real Virgil had cut there so long ago. They looked older now, weathered but still visible, a reminder of genuine love. Not the possessive hunger that had tried to claim her in the days that followed. Millbrook Crossing felt like a town waking from a long dream. The women who'd suffered strange illnesses over the years found themselves mysteriously restored. Their memories and emotions returned to them whole. Etta Geneva, found by the river, turned out to be merely unconscious, drained but alive, recovering. Slowly, as her stolen vitality flowed back to her, Beulah burned the letters. All of them, every cream-colored lie. She watched the flames consume 20 years of false hope and felt nothing but relief. The real Virgil's memory deserved better than to be tainted by what the entity had made of his love. She kept the cottage, but opened it to visitors. Her kitchen became a gathering place for the other war widows, women who'd learned, as she had, that there was life to be lived beyond grief. She tended the roses, but planted new flowers too, bright marigolds and cheerful daisies that had no connection to the past. Luther Pritchard became a regular visitor, bringing news and conversation and a different kind of companionship, one built on mutual respect rather than desperate need. They never spoke of marriage, but they spoke of everything else, two people who'd learned that love could exist without possession. And on quiet evenings, when the wind moved through the oak tree's branches, Beulah sometimes thought she heard an echo of her husband's voice, not the hungry thing that had worn his form, but the gentle man who'd planted roses and promised to love her forever. He was at peace now, she knew, free to rest at last. The roses still bloomed, red as ever, but they no longer felt like a shrine. They were simply beautiful, a reminder that some things endure not because they refuse to change, but because they're willing to grow. If this tale of love transcending the very bounds of death has stirred your heart, pray leave a mark of favor and share your thoughts below. And tell us true, from what corner of this wide world do you watch tonight? Dear friends, from what distant shore or familiar hearth do you hear this story of roses and letters, of love that learned the difference between devotion and hunger? We would know your place in this vast tapestry of souls.